My name is Alex Dolphin. Welcome back to another episode of Ex Ante. Today we're going to discuss the case of State Rubbish Collectors Association versus Siliznoff. This case was heard in the California Supreme Court in the year 1952, and it's quite a name for a case. Let's go ahead and jump into the facts. So the State Rubbish Collectors Association was a large group that claimed they owned everywhere where trash was going to be collected. If you were to collect trash, you were meant to be a member of this association. Siliznoff began collecting trash in the area that this association claimed they had holdover. It's kind of like mafia style, if you can imagine that. They say that they own this area, and if you want to compete or do business in this area, then you basically need to go through them to get granted access to go ahead and conduct your business there. So when Siliznoff started serving a brewery, the association got wind of it, and the garbage collectors were not pleased that someone was circumventing the system of the mafia. So they sent a henchman to basically go threaten Siliznoff and scare him into submission, and which submission for them was paying the association fines and basically turning over that route to the owner of that region in the association. So Siliznoff was terrified. The guy that threatened him said he was going to beat him senseless and then burn his car and slash his tires. So Siliznoff was very nervous. Ultimately, because of this emotional trauma, began to vomit and couldn't work for a few days just because of how it made him feel inside. So that was what his cause of action was. He sued, saying that the state rubbish collectors inflicted great emotional duress upon him when they threatened to hurt him and burn his truck. So the issue before the court was, can an individual recover for emotional trauma inflicted on them by someone else's words? So there was nothing physical about what the henchman from the Rubbish Collectors Association did to Siliznoff. It was all verbal. And the question before the court was, does that constitute enough of a tort that we would allow Siliznoff to go ahead and recover for the damages? So the court ruled that yes, Siliznoff could recover from the State Rubbish Collectors Association because of the emotional distress that was caused to him by the statements of the henchman from the Rubbish Collectors Association. So that emotional distress did warrant recovery. They cited the restatement on torts, where briefly there was an amendment done in the year 1947 to Section 46, which allowed someone to recover for emotional distress, and the court cited that portion of the restatement in their decision. Considering this was a big move in the realm of torts, allowing someone to recover for words rather than actual physical harm, allowing someone to recover for something that a bit more subjective, emotional harm. It's a state inside of an individual that others don't necessarily have direct access to. They might be able to see the way you feel, they might be able to see emotions on your face, but they can't ultimately feel the way you feel. I mean, there's people that are empathetic, but you can't feel exactly what someone else feels ever. So we're allowing torts to go into this subjective realm of internal emotional states, and that's what's happened here. So that obviously brings some questions as to how do we determine when someone has really suffered emotional distress? And the court tried to answer that in their decision. They said, greater proof that mental suffering occurred is found in the defendant's conduct designed to bring it about than in physical injury that may or may not have resulted therefrom. So the court is saying that because it's so blatant in this case that the henchman from the association, when he was barking and yelling and threatening Siliznoff, that he was intending to cause emotional harm, that's where we're going to go ahead and say that is how we can find that emotional distress should have been caused to Siliznoff. Rather than trying to look at how that person feels, we can look at the statements of the individual, the defendant in this case, the henchman, and see what the intention was behind his words. Kind of an interesting spin. It's definitely a necessary problem that the court needs to juggle with in this case. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into some ex ante implications and a couple hypothetical scenarios. So the first implication that comes as a result of this is now we kind of have to guess when someone experiences emotional distress. I know the court did just give that snippet which I read, but ultimately there has to be some level of discretion given to the jury to decide whether an individual did suffer some type of emotional distress. It's not a super objective thing. It's certainly not a rule. It's more of a standard that the court has applied in this case, allowing a plaintiff to recover if they've suffered severe emotional distress. They've created kind of a gray area for what inflicts that emotional distress, and we'll talk about that later in a hypothetical as well. Also, I think it's just important to note that this is a regulation on speech. This common law and the precedent that was established here in this case does have some type of a regulation on speech. The court has certainly hindered free speech in the past, but this is definitely a hindering on free speech. So definitely something to keep in the back of our minds. And then finally, let's think about something that is really good as a result of this ruling. The ruling incentivizes people not to say things to other people that could cause severe emotional trauma. That's obviously a good thing. We don't want societies where people are running around saying terrible things to other people and inflicting deep emotional wounds that those folks have to live with for the rest of their lives. So this court ruling does incentivize people to be kinder to one another. Whether that's the role of the government or not, I mean, it's something to be debated, but the incentives created off the back of this case are good for society. So a couple of hypotheticals, and one that Professor Prosser does note in his book on torts is, what if the henchman would have just threatened the truck and not threatened beating up Siliznoff? He just would have threatened the property. Can then someone recover for this intentional infliction of emotional distress? So something to think about there. Another hypothetical is, I want to just envision one of our favorite TV chefs. I'm sure everyone knows Gordon Ramsay. I mean, if you've ever watched Hell's Kitchen, he really has a tendency to get up in people's faces, especially the contestants, and kind of bark at them and make them feel very low and bad for the poor souffle that they've cooked or the burnt scallops that they served one of his customers. So, is that a situation, though he's not threatening the life, but that intense type of yelling and barking at an individual? It seems certain that Ramsay's trying to inflict some emotional distress in that scenario, though he might be doing it for the ultimate end of the good. He's definitely inflicting some emotional distress on these individuals. Would that be a case where one of these chefs who had been yelled at, scared by Gordon Ramsay, could go ahead and sue Gordon Ramsay for the tort of intentional infliction of emotional distress? So something to think about. I mean, I think that second hypothetical is applicable to any type of a scenario where you have a manager who's aggressive and yells, and an employee who takes the brunt of that. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any other ex-ante implications, incentives generated by this case, go ahead and leave them in the comments below, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day.